All right, next, let's go ahead and talk about how some of these theories apply to the justification of capital punishment. So, nearly everyone agrees that punishments need to fit their crimes, right? And this is the idea of retribution. Perhaps the most central question in philosophical debates over the death penalty is whether any penalty less than death fits the crime of murder. Those people who we can classify as retentionists say no. Right? There is no crime less than death that fits, less than the crime of murder that fits the penalty of death. Abolitionists argue that life in prison without the possibility of parole or some lesser but still severe punishment is sufficient to satisfy the requirements of justice. Abolitionists also often argue that capital punishment is barbaric. It's not suitable for our times, that it involves stooping to the murderer's level of killing. This latter point is not made explicitly in the textbook, but it is sometimes expressed by moderate abolitionists who believe that we would be justified in putting a murderer to death, but that we do well by refraining from exercising that right. We hold ourselves to a higher ideal. I think it's interesting to consider that retentionists often argue that justice requires society to put murderers to death, right? It is a requirement. There is no wiggle room, right? People who are guilty of death must also die, right? They argue that that any lesser punishment fails to respect the value of the life that was taken. And so this would be a really interesting place to have a classroom debate, an argument, if you will. I imagine some of you feel very strongly about the death penalty. Maybe some of you might even argue that the death penalty is too mild of a penalty, right? Not that it's too severe, but it's the easy way out. And this is very different from any standard abolitionist way of thinking about the topic, but it's still worth pointing that out. Deterrence. As noted in the textbook, it is safe to say that the sociological data on deterrence is inconclusive, right? Does the threat of capital punishment deter people from committing murders, right? That data is inconclusive. One interesting observation about punishment and deterrence, not mentioned in the book, has been made by Jeffrey Raymond. Jeffrey Raymond argues that there exists what we call a deterrence threshold. Right? The basic idea of the deterrence threshold is this. If the threat of a very, very bad punishment for doing crime X does not deter one from doing crime X, then making that punishment even worse won't deter one either. So, for example, suppose the penalty for speeding is a $50,000 fine. For nearly everyone, if that doesn't deter you from speeding, neither will a $100,000 fine, even though it's twice as bad. So with respect to capital punishment, it can be argued then that if the threat of life in prison does not prevent a person from committing murder, then the threat of being put to death won't either. All right, so prevention. It is undeniable that the death penalty prevents murderers from killing again. Right? Those people who are on death row, who are then punished, who are given the death penalty, they will not kill again. They are not given that chance. They are not in society. But the flip side of this argument is the standard abolitionist point, that the death penalty is irreversible. So nothing can be done to compensate innocent people who are wrongly put to death. Right? And so this argument doesn't hold as much water. And fourth, rehabilitation. I'll just note quickly that rehabilitation does not necessarily concern a convicted person's life in society. at large. Right? One might be able to do much that is worthwhile while serving a life sentence in prison, as many people do.